I was standing in line at the hardware store on Route 9 holding a quart of wood stain and a bag of brass screws when my phone went off in my back pocket. The screen said, "Unknown caller, Albany, NY." I almost let it ring out. Looking back, I sometimes wish I had, not because I'd want to undo what came after, but because I'd want one more day of believing what I believed about my family. I stepped out of the line and answered. "Is this Mr. Holloway?" "Yes." "My name is Curtis Bremer. I'm the contractor your daughter hired to redo your wife's sewing room out at the house in Steptown. I need you to come back home, sir. Right now if you can. And please, listen to me here. Come by yourself. Don't bring your daughter. Don't bring anybody." There was a pause where I could hear him breathing. He sounded like a man who had been running. "Is something wrong with the house?" "The house is fine. Just come home, Mr. Holloway. I'll be in the side yard." I'd rather not say any more than that on the phone. I want to be honest about what I felt in that hardware store. It wasn't fear. It was more like the way you feel when you step onto ice you thought was solid, and you feel it give just a quarter inch under your boot. Something underneath had shifted. I didn't know what yet. My name is Donovan Holloway. I'm 63 years old. I live in a clapboard farmhouse outside Stephentown, New York, about 40 miles east of Albany on 6 acres that run down to a creek that ices over in January and floods every April. My wife Bernadette passed away 17 months before that phone call. She was 59. The cardiologist at Albany Med said it was an arrhythmia that had been building quietly for a long time. He said sometimes the heart just decides it's tired. I remember nodding when he said it because I didn't know what else to do with my face. Bernadette and I were married 34 years. She kept a sewing room in the back part of the house, what had originally been a sleeping porch before her father, who built this house in 1971, closed it in and put a baseboard heater along the north wall. She sewed quilts mostly. She did some upholstery work for friends. She kept her thread on wooden spools in a cabinet she had refinished herself, organized by color the way a serious painter organizes oils. After she died, I didn't touch that room for almost a year. My daughter Ann kept telling me I needed to deal with it, that leaving it untouched wasn't honoring her mother. It was hiding from her. Ann is 36 and she lives in Saratoga with her husband and my grandson. She has her mother's directness without her mother's patience, which I love her for, and which sometimes makes me tired. It was Ann who finally arranged the contractor. She told me in October that she was going to have someone come repaint the sewing room and put in better lighting and pull up the old carpet, which had a water stain Bernadette had always meant to deal with. She said she would handle everything, that all I had to do was let the man into the house and stay out of his way. I didn't object. I think I was relieved that someone else was making the decision. Curtis Bremer started work on a Friday. By the Sunday morning of his phone call, he had pulled up the carpet, taken down the curtain rods, and was preparing to patch the drywall before painting. That was when he found what he found. When I pulled into the driveway, he was standing where he said he'd be in the side yard by the bulkhead doors, smoking a cigarette with the careful focus of a man who had quit for 10 years and started again that morning. He was maybe 50, heavy-set, with a contractor's permanent squint and a Carhartt jacket that had seen real winters. He put the cigarette out on the sole of his boot when I got out of the truck. "Mr. Holloway, I appreciate you coming alone. I want to show you something before I say anything about it. I haven't touched it. I haven't taken pictures. I haven't called anyone. I figured this is a thing a husband should see for himself first." He walked me through the mudroom and down the back hall to the sewing room. The carpet was rolled up against the far wall. The subfloor underneath was the original pine boards from 1971. He had pulled up a section of those boards along the north side, where the baseboard heater used to run before he disconnected it that morning to do the rewiring. Inside the joist cavity, sitting on a plywood platform someone had screwed into place between two joists, was a small fireproof document safe, the kind you can buy at Staples for $90. It was sitting under that floor as if it had been waiting there. It was bracketed in. Whoever put it there meant it to stay. I almost didn't see it because the board over it had been recut and repit pretty cleverly. I only noticed because the nails on that section were slightly newer than the rest. That's the kind of thing you see after 20 years of pulling up floors. I crouched down. The safe had a 4-digit combination lock on the front. "Mr. Bremer, would you mind giving me the room for a minute?" "Yes, sir. I'll be in the yard. Take whatever time you need." And Mr. Remy, "Holloway, I want to say one more thing, and then I'll go. Whatever's in there, please don't react to it in front of anyone today. Not your daughter, not your son-in-law, not a neighbor. I've been doing this work a long time, and I've seen people get hurt by reacting too fast to things they should have sat with first. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you what I'd tell my own brother." He closed the door behind him. I knew the combination before I had finished kneeling all the way down. Bernadette used the same 4 digits for everything she ever locked. The month and day of our grandson's birthday. I turned the dial. The latch released. Inside there were 3 things. A small spiral notebook with a green cover, the kind she used for sermon notes at our church. A USB stick with a piece of masking tape on it that said for Donovan in her handwriting. And underneath both of those, a sealed business envelope with my name on the front, also in her hand. I sat down on the bare subfloor. I didn't cry. I didn't really feel anything yet. I just sat there for what must have been 10 minutes, holding the envelope in my hands without opening it, looking at the loop she put on her capital D, which always tilted slightly to the right because she was left-handed and had been forced as a child to write with her right. I did not open the envelope right then. I took everything out of the safe and put it into a canvas tote that had been hanging on the back of the door. I closed the safe and slid it back into the cavity. I went outside and told Curtis Bremer that I needed him to come back the following weekend to finish the work, and that I would pay him for the lost days. I asked him not to mention what he had found to anyone, including my daughter when she called him, which she would. He said he understood. He said he had a daughter himself. He said when his mother died, his father had found things too, and the family had never really recovered from how those things were handled. I asked him what he meant. He said it wasn't his story to tell. He shook my hand and got in his truck and left. I went inside and made a pot of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with the tote bag in front of me. Outside the window, the maples down by the creek were halfway through dropping their leaves. I remember thinking very clearly, whatever is in this bag, I am not the same man on the other side of opening it. I sat with that thought for a while. Then I opened the notebook. Bernadette had a particular handwriting style. Very small, very even, slightly cramped at the right edge of the page, because she always underestimated her margins. The first entry was dated almost 2 years before she died. It read, "Met with Hollis Pemberton at the firm today. Showed him the statements. He says the discrepancy in the rollover is normal, a residual from the Schwab transfer last spring, $12,400. Asked him to put the explanation in writing. He said, of course. We'll follow up in 2 weeks. The next entry, 3 weeks later, Hollis has not sent the letter, reminded him twice. He said his assistant is behind on paperwork. We'll give it through end of month. Then, a month after that, letter arrived. It does not match what he told me in the meeting. The letter calls it a portfolio reallocation fee tied to a managed account agreement. I have never signed a managed account agreement. Pulled my copy of the original advisory contract. The version Hollis showed me at the meeting last week has an extra page. My copy doesn't have that page. Pages 4 and 5 are missing from my copy. His version has pages 4, 4A, and 5. I had to put the notebook down. I went to my filing cabinet in the office off the kitchen. Bernadette and I were paperwork people. We had been raised by Depression-era parents, and we kept everything. I found our copy of the advisory agreement with Pemberton Wealth Management in less than 3 minutes. I sat down on the office floor with the binder in my lap and turned to the contract. The pages went from 3 to 6. Pages 4 and 5 were not there. The numbering jumped. I had signed that contract 8 years earlier without ever noticing. I had let my wife handle most of the investment paperwork because she was better at it, and because I trusted Hollis Pemberton, who had been our advisor since 2014, who came to our Christmas open house every December, who had given the eulogy at the funeral for my wife's older brother in 2019. I went back to the kitchen and kept reading. The notebook went on for almost 18 months. Bernadette had tracked, by my eventual count, 9 separate transactions across our IRA accounts and our joint brokerage. Some were called rebalancing fees. Some were called advisory adjustments. Some were called rollover corrections. All of them she had come to believe were unauthorized. The smallest was $3,200. The largest was $31,000. The total by her arithmetic and pencil at the back of the notebook was just over $170,000. I read all of that with a kind of clinical attention, the way you read a medical report about somebody else. It hadn't reached me yet. Then I turned to the second half of the notebook. The entries changed. They became shorter. The handwriting got a little less even. Tired again today. Couldn't finish the binding on the Carlson quilt. Heart skipping when I climbed the stairs. Made appointment with Dr. Youssef. Dr. Youssef ran labs. ECG shows some irregularity. He says women in their late 50s sometimes develop this. He prescribed a beta blocker. He says to come back in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Symptoms have not improved. Worse climbing stairs. Worse after meals. Dr. Youssef adjusting dosage. And then in handwriting that had a slight tremor I had never seen in my wife's writing before, the vitamins. The bottle from the Christmas gift. When did I start them? Check date. I remembered the bottle. 2 Christmases before she died. Our daughter Wynne had brought her mother a gift she said had come from Hollis Pemberton and his wife Marilla, who Wynne was friendly with from a women's networking group in Albany. It was a wellness bundle, the kind that comes in a wicker basket with cellophane and a ribbon, lavender bath salts, a jar of local honey, 2 bottles of high-end supplements, cardio support complex, one of the bottles said, for heart health and circulation, doctor formulated. Bernadette had been pleased by the gift. She had started taking the supplements the next day, 2 capsules with breakfast. I felt the kitchen go very quiet around me, not literally. The refrigerator was running and a tractor was going past out on the road. But inside my head, everything got very still. I turned the next page. Have been taking the cardio support for 14 months. Symptoms started around month 4. Have not been able to find this brand online, no manufacturer website. The label gives a P.O. box in Connecticut. I have written to it. No response. Then, I am going to save one of the capsules. I am not going to keep taking them. I will tell Donovan I finished the bottle. I do not want to alarm him until I know. Then, 2 weeks later, in handwriting that had to have been written late at night because the lines wandered, I do not know if I am being paranoid. I do not want to destroy a man's life because I am sick and frightened. But I am sick, and I am frightened, and I know what the numbers in the accounts say. I need to be sure. I have called a lab in Boston. I have made an appointment to drive down on the 14th. She made that drive. The receipt was tucked into the back of the notebook. A 6-hour round trip to a private testing facility in Cambridge, paid for in cash. She had told me she was going to a quilting expo in Lowell. I remembered the day. I remembered making her a thermos of coffee for the drive. I sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open, and I thought about that thermos for a long time. I thought about my wife, sick and frightened, driving alone to a lab in Massachusetts because she didn't want to ruin a man's life until she was certain. I thought about how I had kissed her at the door and told her to drive safe. I read the last few entries. They were brief. Results inconclusive but flagged. Lab tech said the capsule contained a cardiac glycoside compound at low concentration, not what is on the label. Recommended further testing at a forensic lab. Said the home version of the test cannot fully identify the compound. I am too tired to do this alone. I am going to talk to Donovan this weekend. I am going to show him everything. That entry was dated 8 days before she died. She never made it to that weekend. She had what the cardiologist called a sudden event on a Wednesday afternoon while she was in the garden putting away tomato cages. I found her there when I came back from town. The ambulance took an hour. They said it wouldn't have mattered if it had taken 5 minutes. I sat at my kitchen table 17 months later, and I understood that I had been wrong about how my wife died. I want to tell you what I did next, because I think it matters. I did not get in my truck and drive to Hollis Pemberton's office on State Street in Albany and put my hands on him. I wanted to. I want to be very honest about that. I am 63 years old, and I was raised by a man who would have driven to Albany. But I sat at that table for another hour, and I thought about my wife driving 6 hours to a lab in Cambridge because she didn't want to be wrong, and I thought about what she would have said to me if she had been sitting across from me at that table. She would have said, "Donovan, please don't. Not yet. Not without the evidence." So I opened the envelope. The letter inside was 4 pages. I'm not going to share most of it. There are things a man's wife writes to him for him and not for anyone else. But she had written in a passage near the end, something I want to put down here, because I have thought about it almost every day since. If you are reading this, it means I did not get to tell you in person. I'm so sorry. I have been trying to figure out how to tell you for months. Part of why I did not tell you sooner is that I needed to be sure. The other part, and you deserve to know this, is that I think Hollis did not act alone. There is a name I cannot bring myself to write yet, because I am not certain enough. Please read the notebook again. Look at the dates of the transfers. Look at who was at our house in the weeks before each one. Look carefully. And please, my love, do not confront anyone alone. Take this to a lawyer first. Take it to the police second. Do not give them the chance to be ready for you. I went back to the notebook. I read it again. I looked at the dates. I went to my own calendar, the paper one I keep in my office, and I went back through 18 months of appointments. The pattern took me 3 hours to see because I did not want to see it. Every single one of the 9 unauthorized transactions was preceded, within the same week, by a visit to our house from our son-in-law, Marcus Wynn's husband, a commercial real estate guy in Saratoga who had been part of our family for 11 years, who carved the turkey at Thanksgiving, who took my grandson fishing in the creek behind the house, who had cried at Bernadette's funeral. Every visit, every transfer, within 7 days. I sat with that for a long time. I sat with it the way you sit with bad weather. You can't go out in. I made another pot of coffee. I let it go cold. The light in the kitchen window changed from the bright flat noon light to the long yellow afternoon light to dusk. I drove the next morning to Albany, and I sat down in the office of a lawyer named Rees-Bowdler, who had been the attorney for my wife's family for 2 generations and who had retired the year before, but still took meetings for the families he had represented. I told him everything. I had the notebook, the USB, the envelope, the binder with our advisory agreement, the lab receipt from Cambridge, and a Ziploc bag with the bottle of remaining capsules, which I had found exactly where my wife had said it would be, in the bottom drawer of her sewing cabinet, under a folded square of muslin. Rees-Bowdler listened without saying anything for almost an hour. When I finished, he sat with his hands folded on his desk and he said, "Donovan, I want you to understand what you are telling me, before you do anything else with this. You are telling me that your son-in-law may have given inside information about your accounts to your financial advisor, and that your financial advisor may have used that information to defraud you, and that your wife was poisoned, slowly, by a substance disguised as a vitamin. Is that what you are telling me?" I said yes. That was what I was telling him. He said, "I have one question for you before we go further. Do you believe your daughter knew?" I had been holding that question in my throat for 14 hours. I said, "I don't think she knew. I don't think she could have known. But I don't know." He nodded. He said we would proceed in a way that did not require me to answer that question yet. What happened over the next 11 months, I will summarize because the details would fill a longer telling than this is. Rees-Bowdler brought in a former prosecutor friend of his who consulted on financial crime cases. They put me in touch with a detective in the Albany field office of the FBI named Special Agent Doreen Volstead, who specialized in elder fraud. The capsules were sent to a forensic toxicology lab at SUNY Upstate. The compound was identified as a synthesized cardiac glycoside structurally similar to digoxin, but altered enough to suggest it had been produced specifically to mimic the effects of natural cardiac decline. In low doses taken over many months, it would produce exactly the arrhythmia pattern Bernadette had developed. It would not be flagged on a standard autopsy because no one would have been looking for it. Hollis Pemberton was arrested on a Wednesday morning in March at his office in front of his staff. The charges started with securities fraud and wire fraud and theft. They added, 6 months later, after further investigation, charges related to the supplements and the death of my wife. The federal prosecutor told Rees-Bowdler that the death charges would be the hardest to prove because of the chain of custody on the toxicology, because of the months between exposure and death, because Hollis Pemberton would never admit to providing the capsules and his wife Marilla would deny it under oath. I understood that. I had spent enough time with the evidence by then to understand that the law and what I knew to be true were going to be 2 different things at the end. My son-in-law Marcus was interviewed by Agent Volstead in May. He came to that interview with a lawyer of his own, paid for, it later came out, by Hollis Pemberton's defense fund. Marcus admitted that he had told Hollis about our account balances and our investment strategy over a series of dinners and drinks across about 3 years. He said he had not known what Hollis was going to do with the information. He said he had been struggling financially. His real estate business had taken on debt during the pandemic, and he had borrowed money from Hollis on the side, with the understanding that he would repay it from a deal that never closed. He said he had been a fool. He said he had not known about the capsules. He said he was prepared to take a polygraph. He took the polygraph. He passed the question about the capsules. He failed the question about whether he had ever suspected Hollis of harming the family. The federal prosecutor declined to charge him with anything related to my wife's death, but charged him with conspiracy to commit wire fraud. He pleaded to a lesser charge in exchange for testimony against Hollis Pemberton. He was sentenced to 26 months. He will be out in less than 2 years. My daughter Inna did not know. She found out, the way the rest of the family found out, through a phone call from me, 3 days before the arrests, when Reese Bodler told me I had to tell her before the news broke. I made that phone call from my kitchen, sitting at the same table where I had read the notebook 17 months after my wife died. I told my daughter what her husband had done. I told her what her father's investment advisor had done. I told her as gently as I could what I believed had happened to her mother. She did not say anything for a very long time. Then she said, "I need to call you back," and she hung up. She called me back 4 hours later. She had her son with her at her sister-in-law's house. She had not gone home. She did not go home for 2 months. The marriage did not survive. I will not say more about that part of it because it is her story to tell, and not mine. Hollis Pemberton was convicted on the fraud and theft charges. The charges related to my wife's death were ultimately dropped before trial because of a problem with the toxicology chain of custody that Reese Bodler explained to me 4 times and that I understood intellectually but never accepted in my chest. Hollis Pemberton was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison. He will be in his late 70s when he comes out. The civil settlement returned most of the stolen money. I gave a third of it to my daughter. I gave a third of it to a fund for elder fraud victims at Albany Med. I kept a third of it in case my grandson needs it for college someday. I still live in the farmhouse outside Steptown. Curtis Bremer came back the following month and finished the work in the sewing room. He brought a younger man with him, his nephew, who was learning the trade. They put down new flooring and repainted the walls. A soft yellow Bernadette had picked out from a paint chip, taped to the inside of her sewing cabinet a year before she died, which I found when I was emptying it. The room is bright now. I go in there sometimes and sit in her chair, and I do not feel haunted. I feel her. I have thought about a lot of things in the time since this happened, and there are a few I want to say plainly because I think they are the only useful thing I can give to anyone who finds themselves listening to a story like this one and wondering what they would do. The first is that the people who hurt you most are almost never strangers. They are the people you have already decided not to look at carefully. Bernadette saw what was happening because she was, in the small details of money and paperwork, more clear-eyed than I was, and because she was willing to entertain the idea that someone who came to our Christmas open house and ate at our table might also be stealing from us. I was not willing to entertain that idea. That is why she had to do it alone. The second is that loving someone does not mean trusting them blindly. My wife trusted me. She also took 18 months to be sure of what she suspected before she involved me, not because she didn't love me, but because she did. She didn't want to ruin my friendship with Hollis Pemberton over a mistake. She didn't want to make me suspect my own son-in-law over a coincidence. She wanted to be certain first, and being certain took longer than her body had left. I have wondered more times than I can count whether she would have lived if she had told me sooner. The answer is probably yes. If she had come to me when she first noticed the missing pages in the contract, I would have raised hell, and Hollis Pemberton would have backed off, and the supplements would have ended with the bottle she had already opened, and her heart would not have been wrecked by 16 months of slow poisoning. I have had to make my peace with that. I have made it imperfectly. Some days the peace holds, and some days it does not. The third thing is that my wife, in the last year of her life, sick and frightened and alone with the worst suspicion a person can carry, drove 6 hours to a lab in Cambridge to be certain she was not wrong. She wrote down everything she observed. She kept the bottle. She bought a safe and she screwed it into the joists of her own sewing room floor, and she put the truth into it, and she waited for me to find it. She trusted that I would find it. She trusted that when I did, I would do the right thing in the right order. She was right about the first part. I hope I have been right about the second. The notebook is in a fireproof box at the lawyer's office now. The capsules are in evidence storage. The letter she wrote me is in the top drawer of my dresser, where I see it every morning when I get a clean shirt. I do not read it every day. I read it on the days when I need to remember who she was, which is most days, but not all. She was the most careful woman I have ever known. She was also, in the end, the bravest. And the thing I want to say to anyone listening, the thing I would write on the inside of a wall for someone else to find someday, is this: when something feels wrong, write it down, date it, save the evidence, tell someone you trust. Do not assume that the people closest to you are the people farthest from the danger. Sometimes they are the door the danger walks through. I miss her every day. I miss her in the sewing room and at the kitchen table and in the truck and at church. But I am glad, in a way I did not expect to be glad of anything ever again, that she trusted me enough to leave the truth where I would find it. That trust is the last gift she gave me. I am still trying to live up to it. I have had a long time now to sit with what happened, and I want to say something honest about the shape of it, because I think the shape matters more than the details. My wife did not die the way the death certificate says she did. She died because a man we trusted decided that the slow theft of $170,000 was worth the slow theft of a human life, and because another man we trusted, my own son-in-law, sat at our table on holidays while feeding that first man the information he needed to do it. The cause came years before the effect. By the time Bernadette felt the first skipped beat in her chest, the decisions that killed her had already been made by other people in rooms she had never been in. That is how most quiet wreckage works. The damage arrives long after the choice. I have thought a lot about why she did not tell me sooner, and I do not blame her for it anymore, but I do not romanticize it either. She was being careful. She was being decent. She did not want to destroy a man on a hunch. Those are good qualities, and they are also the qualities that gave Hollis Pemberton 16 more months to keep adding capsules to a bottle. There is a lesson in that, I have to say plainly. Being a good person is not the same as being a wise one. You can be both. You should try to be both. But if you are forced to choose in a hurry between protecting somebody's reputation and protecting somebody's life, choose the life. Be willing to be wrong out loud. Bernadette would tell you the same thing if she could. The other thing I want to say is about staying upright when something like this lands on you. I am 63 years old. I had the urge, the first night after I read that notebook, to drive to Albany and put my hands on a man. I did not. Not because I am better than that urge, but because my wife, in her own handwriting from beyond her own life, asked me not to. She asked me to be patient and careful, and to take it to the right people in the right order. I did. It took 11 months. Hollis Pemberton is in federal prison. My son-in-law is in federal prison. The money came back. None of that gave me my wife back. But I did not become a man. My wife would not have recognized in the process of trying to get her justice, and that mattered. That was the discipline. That was the only thing left to me that I could still get right. If you take anything from what I have told you, take this. Write things down when they feel wrong. Trust the people you love enough to tell them what you are seeing. And when the worst happens, do not let the worst make you into something the person you lost would not want to find waiting on the other side.